The Birth of Optima, Greenshore, by David Hammond. Chapter 4. Zuntra's Struggle. The sun shines ever so bright at the fronts, to the point that we've had to continuously cake ourselves in sunscreen. It appears the shade of the pits had protected us very well. However, they certainly had their drawbacks. Observing each other's pale skin after our long-awaited wash, and we had quickly come to realise. Upon our arrival to the base, we were immediately ushered to the side of a truck by General Legos, along with one of his overly keen personnel, who goes by the name of Duncan Maloney, the uncle of Francis Maloney, the young pitster who was killed when an incinerator shell exploded inside his pit. General Legos had stressed to us that we were banned from entering the bunker until we were clear of any remnants of the pits. Himself and Duncan instantly stripped us naked and began soaping us up from head to toe with heavy-duty cleaning liquid, the kind of stuff used to get crud off vehicles. We were then scrubbed down in an inhumane fashion to help rid us of the dirt and stench that had accumulated on our grimy bodies. At first it was uncomfortable, yet seeing the soot running down my legs was such a relief. They then hosed us down. The painful screams as the cold water hit our pale bodies was noticed by the other troops, who immediately started to gather and laugh at us. Scott's screams in particular were like that of a Carakian folklore banshee, as Duncan doused us with the freezing cold water. From there we were taken to the medical station to be treated for our sores. All three of us were found to have had minor medical problems that were then treated with prescribed medication. Having been covered in ointment and badges, we were then swiftly released from the medical bay. Taylor had a rather stupid looking bandage that had been applied by the medic, who had wrapped it around the circumference of his face due to his sore nose. Taylor's sore nose did look rather unpleasant because it had clearly lost layers of skin, therefore leaving behind an abnormal indentation on his nasal bone. However, the medic had told Taylor at the time that his skin should eventually build back up and lose its reddish blemish. The lack of natural vitamins from the sun's rays had made us look tremendously ill-looking, which was instantly made noticeable by the two generals, who had studied us as if we were some sort of unknown alien race. After a lengthy conversation between the two generals, they both came up with an innovative project, which has fortunately allowed us to regain some well-needed vitamin D. The truck that had transported us to Alpha 15 had previously delivered a substitute gun just before it had taken Alpha 15's working Z6 to Alpha 10. The two generals decided for all three of us to be put on light duties. So for the first week, myself and Scotty had spent 6 hours a day preparing the new Z4 turret. We were then given the remaining time to do as we pleased, which often involved basking under the warm rays of the sunshine to help us regain those well-needed vitamins. Today is the start of our third week at the Alpha 15 outpost. Myself and Scott, along with another serviceman called Robbie Garnett, have been undertaking 8-hour rotational duties on the new Z4 turret. Our rotational duties consist of scanning the much closer red zone, which can become extremely nerve-wracking, especially when the enemy snipers target their slugs at our base and come within inches of our Z4's hidden location. Apart from the spontaneous sniper rounds hitting the sandbags, the base isn't that bad actually. Okay, so General Legos can be a bit bossy at times, but I guess he needs to be, especially with the kind of crud that he has to put up with. General Legos comes across as a rather cool chap. Yeah, underneath that smile lays his more serious side. Legos stands at 5 feet 9 inches in height and has a constant deceiving frown that makes him look perpetually unhappy. He also has a lovely full head of hair that he painstakingly combs over, giving himself that 1970s porn star look. Another interesting feature of Legos is his rather small beady blue eyes that sit back amongst his thick heavy wrinkles. You can clearly see that the lack of sleep has got the better of him, as his wrinkles are very noticeable, obviously brought on by his continuous strained face. My first preconceived assumptions of the pair of stocky generals were totally wrong, because if they had have wanted to, they could have made us suffer on the first day. Yet they didn't, and in fact both made sure we were all safely adapted to the fronts. We had all been given special dietary plans, written out by the medic, to help build ourselves up with compounded supplements. Upon these lifestyle changes, I've now managed to gain more weight, down to being able to hang out in the canteen more often. I now sit at the canteen's bar, patiently waiting for myself and Scott's porridge, while they both spin inside the micro oven. The canteen is located at the top landing of the 2-leveled bunker. According to General Legos, all 3 of the solid steel-framed bunkers were buried 20 feet down, shortly after the Hero mission. Secondly, the sandbag walls were then added, and then lastly its defensive Z6 weapons installed. The bunker's bottom floor is split into 4 individual reinforced rooms that consist of armoury, washroom, medic station and food storage station. Then there's the top floor that's divided into 3 separate reinforced rooms. Each of the upper alcoves consists of canteen, sleeping quarters and entertainment room. Our porridge is now ready, as I am alerted by the oven's annoying timer bell, not forgetting the comforting smell of our hot porridge. Opening the oven, I proceed with caution. I pick up the hot bowls while quickly placing them down onto the metal tray. "Fud it! You all right, Sharpe?" asked Scott, now chuckling to himself at the table. "Nearly burnt my bloody fingers off," I replied. "The porridge is piping hot, so be careful." Collecting the sachets of government jam, along with the clattering spoons, I then make my way over to our table. The circular stainless steel tables are randomly situated around the floor of the canteen, and each have 2 round metal stools that are bolted down onto the bunker's surface. I lay the tray down on the table and pass Scott his breakfast, using a serviette to protect my fingers. I then sit myself down on the cold steel seat in front of him and blow onto my porridge to help disperse the heat. "How was your rest, Scotty boy?" "Well, can't grumble, mate," said Scott, squeezing jam onto his oats. "The sleep here is far better than those dreaded pits. However, that horrible thudding humming sound coming from the ammunition trailer is nothing but a buzzturd. Anyway, thanks for preparing breakfast, fella." Scott stirs the jam into his steamy hot porridge and attacks it. "I know, it's an awful sound. I don't miss the pits either. I suppose it was a good move after all," I said, preparing my breakfast with the jammy sludge. "We could be down the wastes, eating crud. Oh, and our Louis over there wouldn't have met his new lady friend." Scott chuckles as he eats his porridge and then covers his mouth with his free hand. Turning my face from him, I look down towards the passageway that runs towards the ground level staircase. I instantly spot Louis, peacefully stretched out on Isabella's bed. Isabella is a grey female cat with bright sparkling blue eyes and belongs to the second in command, General Barrick. General Barrick is a pleasant man, and his heartfelt love towards animals is truly amazing. He was a former vet just before the invasion and owned his own veterinary practice that was established well within the wealthy Blue Zone. Apparently he earned a successful living from it too, down to the zone being ultra wealthy. I was somewhat confused when I first heard about Barrick's well-to-do business and was slightly baffled as to why he was here. I'm not saying that he doesn't have what it takes to be a leading figure. It's just that he seems so out of place. Being rather confused about Barrick's past, I began to poke about the base for some information and started off by asking Robbie Garnett, who is better known as Lips, obviously because he doesn't stop talking about other people's business. Garnett told me the building complex in which Barrick's veterinary practice was located within was unfortunately struck by a malfunctioned Zuntra Grant air rocket, totally levelling the place. He also mentioned that a close family member of Barrick was tragically caught up in the inferno, which was brought on when the individual went back inside to save the animals. I was rather upset from being enlightened to Barrick's unfortunate circumstances and wish I had never asked Garnett. Again, it goes to show the effects that conflict has on people as a whole. As bad as it may sound, the collective pain has also made me feel somewhat comfortable, in a way, in the sense that I'm not the only one who is suffering inside from the loss of a loved one. On the day of our arrival, General Barrick had took Louis from us and scrubbed him down, eventually clearing the fleas from the cat's body. Himself and the other men were overwhelmingly honoured to meet Louis, the courageous pit fighter. They laughingly passed him around like a celebrity, while Louis tried his best to claw away at their faces. The chap spoke about the many myths circulating the force's pits to divisions, stories of how Louis single-handedly killed 500 gatekeepers. The jokes and joyful laughs of the troops echoed from Alpha 15's outpost that day and must have travelled to the city's centre. They were that loud. It created great banter amongst the base and eventually broke the ice between us and our fellow brothers. That day I pondered to myself, old Louis really doesn't have the darn slightest idea of how formidable he is known to be. Or does he? I relax my elbows onto the table and spot Isabella in my left side peripheral vision. She enters the bunker curiously via the steps and then leaps down onto its aluminium surface. Landing perfectly onto the passageway of the bunker, the well-groomed cat then creeps stealthily to Louis's location. Having reached her bed, she then comfortably cuddles up next to him, purring. Scott looks up at me from having watched her sly movements and slops his porridge. Sharpe, do you think they'll ever have kittens? I reply with a chuckle. Who, Louis? The cat who skillfully destroyed 500 creepers with just his claws? Why, of course they will. Scott laughs as I continue. Louis's offspring will march forth to Zakataria and fight those upside-down baz-turds on their beaches. We both laugh while looking down at Louis and Isabella inside their makeshift bed. Louis alarmingly stares due to our loud laughs, and then decides to cut his eyes at us before calmly returning to rest. Central to the canteen and its tables is the stairs that lead out onto the outside of the fronts. One side of the stairs is the canteen's bar, and the other is the dining area. Our chuckles are soon cut short by authoritative boots that begin descending the steps to my left. We both greet General Barrick by simultaneously saying, "Good morning, General," Barrack enters the canteen, clutching a large brown folder, and replies, "Good morning. You alright?" He authoritatively passes us in his tight blue general's uniform, while also wearing his signature baseball cap. General Barrack is 6 feet 2 inches in height, and is also very heavily well built. He religiously wears a baseball cap to hide his large bald head, and has extremely intimidating facial features that makes him look like an overly aggressive person. However, he's not in the slightest, and prides himself to be the total opposite. His frightening looks are soon destroyed by his soft, lisp voice, as he goes on to say, "It looks like Isabella has met her alpha. I believe she is carrying kittens. I can tell just by her behaviour." General Barrack continues descending the stairs, presumably towards the lower level armoury. "Really, General? Way to go, Louis." "Oh, and Isabella," hollered Scott. "Tone it down. The fellas are resting next door," I said, shaking my head. "Sorry, Sharpe. Me and my big gob, eh?" Scott leans back from having heard the great news, and then extends both arms outwardly. He then rests both hands behind his head and uses them as a cushion. "I'm having first choice of the litter. I'll have to tell Taylor. He'll be well delighted," said Scott as he leans himself backwards. "By the way, have you seen him?" "Nope," I replied. "And you?" "Me neither." Because of our task with the Z4 setup, along with our rotational duties, I hadn't seen Taylor for a while, probably down to the fact that our duty patterns have clashed. "I'd love to qualify for the Z6, Sharpe. You know what?" "What?" I asked. "I might give it a bash, you know," replied Scott, stroking away at his chin. I gestured to Scott with an encouraging continued nod, and then reply, "I don't know why you don't give it a go. I mean, if Taylor can do it, then you shouldn't have any problem." Seeing that Taylor had previously served at Alpha 20 and was already Z6 qualified, Legos had put him on a 2-week refresher course. General Legos earlier informed me that Taylor had yesterday completed his 2-week refresher course and was now operating the Z6. This has now boosted our base considerably by having 6 men in total, including Taylor, doing 8 hours rotational shifts on both Z6 turrets. I flipped my wrist to check the time. The clock face states 0745 hours. Scott's up shortly on Z4 watch, whilst I rest from doing the even shift that started at 1600 hours and finished at 2400 hours. "Right, I'm going to gear up, fella," said Scott, studying his watch. Scott demolishes the rest of his porridge and then swiftly stands up. He rotates his neck and yawns, and then walks over to the bar with his empty bowl. Scott looks immaculately clean with his new white vest and black combat trousers, while at the same time wearing extremely polished boots, a distant sight to the one I knew back at the pits. Cleaning his bowl and spoon at the sink, he then turns around and says, "Sharpe, I'm going to have to love you and leave you. Make sure you rest up, buddy." "Will do," I replied, while continuing to eat my porridge. After cleaning his bowl, he then continues down towards the armoury, whistling lightly. General Legos has stressed to us that we must always carry weapons whilst outside. This means carrying a heavy M19 rifle with 4 magazines, and obviously our pistols. Having Scott gone to retrieve his armaments from Barrack, I too proceed to clear my bowl. I then head off to the entertainment room from finishing my chores while carefully minding the cats. The entertainment room is medium in size, with a yellow worn-out projector screen that hangs from the wall to my right. Film, reels and documented books are neatly tucked into a pine bookcase that's also situated to the right side of the room. A worn-out red Chesterfield two-piece sofa is located to the left of the room, and centre of this is a small mahogany coffee table that aims an ancient squared wooden projector machine flush with the creased hanging projector screen. The walls throughout the majority of the bunker are made up of stainless steel panels that are riveted to the concrete steel framed walls. Random scattered photos decorate the cold steel walls of the entertainment room, with stunning pictures of large-breasted women posing in skimpy low-cut tops. It certainly has that homely feel about it, I loudly said to myself, as I have a browse at the sleazy pictures. Moving towards the bookcase, I now examine the endless supply of informative documented books and begin running my fingers across their dusty spines. I find a metal film reel case, which appears to have been tucked in between two historical books. Pushing the books apart, I draw the circular case from the shelf and start unlocking its stiff metal clips. Having forcefully prized it open, I notice straight away that the film reel looks as though it hasn't been touched for a very long time, because it's absolutely caked in dust. I begin to wipe the dust off its stained label. The writing on the shell of the reel reads, Eric Whittaker's Zuntra and its Struggle. I said to myself, perplexed. Where have I heard that before? I suddenly hear footsteps coming from the bottom floor, whom I straight away instinctually know to be Scott's, obviously down to his scuffled lazy steps. I immediately switch my observations and glance my head to the right, and can now see Scotty Boy walking carefully over the cat's bed. Scott quietly walks up to the entertainment room, nodding me a wink. Sharpe, get on this. Barrick has just informed me about those thudding creepers. It takes me a couple of seconds to process what Scott is going on about. You know, the ones we brought in, said Scott wide-eyed. Come on, wake up. Sorry, I'm miles away, I said with an intrigued head on. What about them? Well, according to reports just in, said Scott as he draws closer into the room, that blast we heard when we were out sunbathing weeks back was apparently caused by one of those creepers. What are you going on about, Scott? How on this flat earth could it have been one of them? They were both unarmed. Sharpe, they both had explosives hidden within their abdomens, man, said Scott wide-eyed. One of the cruds successfully detonated himself during interrogation. Come on, surely this can't be true. You're winding me up, I said as I snigger in total disbelief. Are you honestly saying that those cruds had internal explosives wired up inside themselves? Look, Sharpe, I'm not saying it, said Scott, pushing his thumb into his chest armour. The darn officials are saying it. Honestly, mate, I can't believe it myself. Scott shakes his head while staring down to the floor and continues. Seriously, man, does it not make you wonder as to why they didn't put up a fight with us? Suppose so, I said in an agreeing manner. But how could they tell if it was the creeps who detonated? I mean, the bodies of the bastards would have been blown to thudding bits. According to the reports, one of the gatekeepers managed to detonate himself, replied Scott, as he tries to recall what Barrick had told him by rubbing both of his temples. However, the other crud failed to detonate and underwent an autopsy by explosive experts. I stand with cold shivers running up my spine. They took the failed bomber to New Haven Hospital, and upon extensive investigations found explosive type chemicals hidden deep inside the bastard's internal organs. Spooky crud, mate, I replied as I scratched at the crown of my head. I've never heard any of those fudders being able to conceal explosives inside themselves. I know, Sharpe, me neither. See, I told you there's more to those fudders than we can truly comprehend. We were extremely lucky, pal. I mean, they could have killed us both. Especially when I booted the crud in the face. Could you imagine it? I could have triggered off their fudding explosives. Eh? I'll give you that, Scott. They certainly are a weird bunch. You're right. We certainly were lucky. Fudders. Look, Sharpe, I'd best be heading off. Otherwise old Baldy Barrett will blow a fuse, said Scott as he turns to exit the room. By the way, Big Juggernauts is a class film, and it contains plenty of bouncing action, fella. Come on, Scotty. It's way too early for that, mate, I laughingly replied. Scott leaves the room decked out in his body armour, while strapped to the nines with his M19 rifle. Turning from where he had stood, I continued browsing the reels and books in total amazement. Scott, keep your eyes peeled, brother, especially for those fudding creeps. Scott comes to a halt and then reverses himself back up to the entertainment room. Signal a clarified thumb up through the narrow doorway. Will do, Sharpe, said Scott, who proceeds to the canteen to ascend the metal stairs. Scott's rifle clangs against the handrails as he exits the bunker. Following behind is the heavy footsteps of General Barrick, who swiftly climbs the stairs to the upper level. General, sir, can I please have a moment of your time? I politely asked as he passes the doorway. Why, certainly. Go ahead, Private Sharpe. That bomb blast that happened in the city centre, I said, while still scratching the crown of my head. Scotty said it was those creeps. You know, the ones we had apprehended. Is there any validity to this report, General? According to these reports, yes there is, replied Barrick, as he stands in the doorway while holding the brown folder with a tight grasp. One of the creepers failed to detonate himself. The latest reports suggest that the creeps were purposely sent into Greenshore to assassinate an unknown high-profile figure, and thankfully failed to do so. The report I have here has took a while to reach us, obviously down to the complexities of the attack. Holy crud, I quietly said as I stand with folded arms. That's wild. Yes, I know, Sharpe. We certainly live in some crazy times, said Barrick, frowning. Is there anything else? I instantly reply, sorry, General, sir. Yes, there is just one more thing, actually. Do you know anything about this film? Eric Whittaker's Zuntra and its Struggle. In an excited manner, he replies, yes, well, of course I do. It's about the struggle of Zuntra, along with the rise and fall of its Zakatarian political influence. Now that's where I heard it from. Alan Watt. He mentioned this documentary once before, in one of his old talk shows. Yet I had never seen it. The General leans his body weight up against the narrow frame of the doorway, while continuing to say, an original reel, or book, fetches 100 credits in the city, as many reels were destroyed by troublesome Zakatarians. I believe that reel in which you are holding belongs to General Legos, so don't get sticky fingers. The documentary itself is mainly about our half Zuntra, half Zakatarian president. Yet Eric Whittaker does demonise the Zuntra religion, which I find very distasteful. President Theodore Hammock was half Zakatarian? That's right, Sharpe, just like myself, replied Barrick, as I stand in further shock. Oh, that's right, Barrick is a Zakatarian surname, I replied, while looking at the General perplexed. How did you obtain a surname? I mean, you don't look nothing like a Zakatarian. Rulers of my father's native homeland, Amarusia, unionised themselves with Zakataria in return for economic growth. However, as you all know, The war with the Southern Alliance had seen my nation dragged into conflict, said Barrick. My mother was a full-blooded Zakatarian who was working as a translator within the Amurusian government when war broke out. When she got married to my Amurusian father, he was forced by an overly religious family to accept her surname as his own, which he did without question, because he truly loved her unconditionally. As much as my mother despised their nation's foreign policy, she truly loved its religious values, which is why I too believe in some of its holy scriptures. Wow. I know, Private. I get that a lot when it comes to explaining my surname, said Barrick. Look, not all Zakatarians are bad. My mother was a kind and considerate human who would go out of her way to help any of our fellow humans. Fascinating stuff. It most certainly is, Private. Look, I'll let you in on a little secret of mine, but you must promise me that you'll not tell anyone, said Barrick, looking over his right shoulder. I promise, General. I'll not breathe a word of it to nobody. I'm very selective with whom I tell it to. However, I can tell by your aura that you hold a good heart, and I know I can trust you, said Barrick in a slightly lower tone. My mother, Denise, was a close friend of President Hammock's mother and father. Are you serious? I replied. Straight up. When Theodore's Zakatarian father died, Carol, Theodore's mother, was left without a place to stay and relied on the help of my dear mother and father. They both decided to take Carol and Theodore in, as it was far too dangerous for them to roam the streets of Zakataria. That's epic, General. I suppose that's your claim to fame then? Well, yes and no, said Barrick. See, Mum and Dad battled hard for them to remain in Zakataria, legally. But the ruling elite back then were adamant to see Carol suffer and refused her and the child the right to citizenship. Bastards! Like the woman and child weren't already suffering enough. Exactly, said Barrick. However, if Carol and Theodore had have remained in Zakataria, Zuntra would never have had its glorious president. So, in one way or another, the negative was actually as a positive synchronicity. I guess you're right, I replied while wiping beads of sweat from my forehead. Especially when you look at it in that aspect. Eric Whittaker, the producer of the documentary, didn't really delve too much into that side of the story, because I believe Carol was in fear of my mum and dad being hauled in by the Zakatarian authorities, obviously for aiding her escape. That's some deep crud, I said while looking at the movie reel. I myself was born a few years after Carol and Theodore fled to Zuntra. From what I heard, Mum had contacted Carol and updated her on the protests that were being organised by fellow Zakatarians who were experiencing similar injustices at home, said Barrick, whose eyes look as if they are about to shed a tear. Mum was eventually arrested for being a political activist, forcing my father and myself to flee to Zuntra. Damn. And what came of it, General? I mean, did they free her? Mum eventually died in prison many years later, said Barrick, holding back his tears. My father, well, he passed away, down to a broken heart. Appears that her death had swallowed him up. Honestly, he was never the same after she died. A tear begins to build up in the General's right eye, forcing him to wipe it away with his sleeve. Sorry, General. I should never have asked. Don't be silly, Private. It's nice to be able to engage about my past, said Barrick, as escaping tears rolled down his right cheek. Carol Hammock Made sure I was well looked after anyway, and managed to find me a loving Zakatarian family, who basically took me in as one of their own. Absolutely fascinating, General. Look, my lips are sealed. Honestly, thanks for sharing such an insightful story. I truly mean it. That it is. Anyway, where was I? Said the General, looking at his wristwatch. I was only coming up for a drink. I'd best be off. Enjoy the documentary. Surprised from what I have just learned, I watch as Barrick peels himself away from the doorway and reply, Thanks, General, sir. So, the creeps can explode themselves at will. Oh, and our great glorious president, Mr. Theodore Hammock, was half Zakatarian, just like Barrick. Barrick's past is absolutely amazing, and the epic story about his mother is fit to be published in any well-known bookstore. Damn, you really do learn something new every day. The sound of heavy boots can be heard coming down the steps of the bunker, along with the clanging sound of a rifle butt. Scott's now on shift. General, said Robbie Garnett, I'm going to head downstairs because I'm in desperate need of the toilet. Honestly, I'm about to pop, General. That's fine, go ahead, replied the General. I'll meet you in the armoury. Robbie passes by the entertainment room, clutching his crutch, and says, Sharpe, what's that you're about to watch? Zuntra and its struggle. You fancy watching it with me? I'll wait for you to finish up. Fud that, said Garnett, as he swiftly moves from the door. I can't stand all that political nonsense. I'm off to bed. General Barrick walks past the entertainment room, ratting a glass of juice that contains a large amount of ice cubes. He then stops and rolls his eyes at me, due to Garnett's ignorance, and proceeds to descend the steps towards the lower level. I can now see why General Barrick is so selective when it comes to sharing his story with certain people. Imagine if Barrick had told Garnett about his story. The man wouldn't have a clue. If it doesn't involve football or silly trivial gossip about members of the base, then it's not worth a wank to Garnett. And again, they do say, ignorance is bliss. The bomb blast that occurred on our second day came from the south-eastern side of central Greenshore. A plume of dirty black smoke could be seen rising up to the dome from miles away. Myself and Scott were basking under the warm rays of the sun at the time, behind the safety of the sandbag wall. I remember us both being plagued by the C-sector sirens, as we surmised on theories of what could have happened. Coming to think of it, when we apprehended the creeps in Central Park, I remember Scott being totally baffled as to why they didn't put up a fight. His mad theory of them being aliens was severely grating on me at the time, so I didn't really look too much into it. I now find myself being swayed on the fact that these fudders could very well be from the outside of this mysterious dome. Could Alan Watt be right, after all, about them being from planet Zig? Or is it Zag? Hang on a minute. Here I go again, blindly joining in with the wacky theories of both Alan and Scott. Well, it's hard not to, because the advanced technology that went into their internal explosives is something quite extraordinary. Could it be that the creepers are indeed our alien overlords? What I'm saying may sound absolutely absurd, but I find it totally fascinating of how these Baz turds can possess such advanced scientific sorcery. I've always believed that they are part of some kind of android program, which has been designed and developed by the Zakatarians. Could it be that Zakataria have specifically crafted androids to undertake extreme suicide missions? Missions that would generally be impossible for the likes of an average human being to undertake. If that's the case, then they, the Zakatarians, have harnessed the advanced technological capabilities of being able to artificially create something in their image, something that doesn't know pain, something that will not ask questions, and finally, something that will kill without blinking an eye. Talking about eyes, the way those creepers stared at us back at the pits was extremely uncomfortable, and the way they perpetually wept of blood was just downright bizarre. I wonder what the gatekeeper's fascination is with the pyramid symbol too. The only relative thing I can think about is that it is printed on nearly every Zakatarian banknote. Must have some connection. Maybe it's their official symbol of identification. I guess that if the Zakatarians have created them, then I suppose they're going to want to symbolise their ownership somehow. I swear I heard Alan Watt speak of this once before. That's right. He mentioned in an old episode in which he said that they, the Zakatarians, worship the odd-looking symbol throughout their nation. Perhaps I should have asked Barrick what his thoughts are in regards to the gatekeepers and the pyramid symbol, because if it's anyone that will have any good enough information, it'll be him, no doubt. I really am trying my utmost best not to go all out conspiracy theorist here, but it's just so hard not to, especially when the dots connect so precisely. However, I'm not going to get myself carried away with it all, as I believe it's best to sit on the fence until I gain more information. Like Scotty Boy, who accepts the drivel without questioning absolutely any of it. Well, I guess myself and Scotty Boy came off quite lucky then. Imagine what would have happened if the pair of gatekeepers had exploded themselves on us. Just doesn't bear thinking about. All I know is that we are extremely lucky. Having been swamped with various theories of the gatekeeper's position within the Zakatarian Empire, followed by the dreadful fear of dying at their sinister hands, I tried distracting myself with the movie reel. Both generals take interval rest patterns, so knowing that Legos might be resting on the same landing, I gently close a steel door. I then carefully connect the old reel into the feeder cog and start powering the projector up by pressing its worn out chrome power switch. The light projecting from the projector flickers as it starts and instantly illuminates the room. Leaning over, I kill the switch of the main light source and watch on as particles of dust float in front of the projector's light. The film begins with the host of the documentary standing at the side of a pile of old books that are neatly stacked at the top of an old wooden table. Grainy images of the projector screen become less distorted as the grey-haired, smartly dressed presenter begins to speak. Hi there and welcome. My name is Eric Whitaker and I am your host. Before I go any further, I would just like to give a slight introduction about myself. For those of you who already know me, I'll try my best to keep it short. Mr. Whitaker signals to the cameraman to zoom in to a large projector screen that's positioned directly behind him, just to his left side. An enlarged document comes into view of the presenter's credentials. That is stamped on a creased official Zuntra historian certificate. I myself have studied history for many years and have immersed myself within the many libraries of both Zuntra and Karakian universities. For much of my existence I have sought after and sifted through many archives, which include various historical notes, along with countless of books written out by well-established deceased historians. It is with a great honour to be given the opportunity to deliver the insightful knowledge of our beloved President Hammock, and I do hope his legacy lives on forever in your hearts. The cameraman now emphasises his view on the old historian, who is now sat behind the table that holds the various books Mr. Whittaker then proceeds to open a book that was sat on top of the pile. Running his eyes across its first page, he then begins to say, "Welcome to Zuntra and its struggle. To be continued."